Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating framework that completely reshapes how we understand power in the modern age. We are looking at the architecture of what's called technofeudalism. And right off the bat, I want to send a huge shout out to Autonomous Archives for their incredibly extensive research that made this whole breakdown possible.
Seriously, the work they've done to map out this highly complex and honestly largely invisible surveillance architecture is just outstanding. We're going to be relying heavily on their research and data today to impartially unpack how these massive digital systems actually operate. It's a pretty tangled web, but we're going to break it down step by step.
All right, so here's our roadmap for today. We'll start at the top with the new digital lords. Then look at the middleman, the dependent institutional vassals, the powerless data serfs, see the whole ecosystem in practice, and finally, talk about the consequences for our future.
Okay, before we meet the actual players, we need to understand the playing field. Technofeudalism is basically a system where power doesn't just come from money or holding political office anymore. It comes from owning the foundational digital infrastructure. Think of it kind of like a medieval kingdom, right? But instead of castles made of stone and borders made of walls, the modern castles are made of proprietary code, sprawling data centers, and massive cloud environments. The people who own the land dictate the rules, and everyone else is just paying rent to live on it.
So let's start at the very top of the food chain. The new digital lords, the absolute rulers of the surveillance ecosystem.
Just let this quote sink in for a second. They do not just provide tools, they define the architecture of power. We are talking about massive tech corporations here. Companies like Palantir, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, and Google Cloud. And the really wild part? These platform owners are unelected, they're largely unaccountable to the general public, and they operate globally across borders. They are, for all intents and purposes, the new ruling class of the digital state.
So how do they actually wield this kind of power? Well, they do it simply by owning the foundational clouds that governments literally run on. That gives them ultimate data sovereignty over exactly how information is stored and shared. And because they design the hidden algorithmic models that generate risk scores, they inherently hold the authority. Plus, through proprietary systems, they lock their clients in. This means they can extract continuous rent and just flat out dictate the operating defaults, making their power over the entire ecosystem completely asymmetric.
Moving down a layer, we get to Section 2, middlemen and private intermediaries. These are the folks actually building the levers of this whole system.
You see, the digital lords don't usually sit there and customize their tools for every single local agency. That's where the intermediaries come in. The consultancies, the system integrators, the data brokers, they build this rigid four-step surveillance pipeline. First up, big tech provides the foundational platform layer. Second, these middlemen connect that platform to institutions, basically letting agencies consume the data through custom dashboards. Third, this directly leads to decisions and actions, things like flagging, surveilling, or restricting individuals. And finally, every single action creates a feedback loop, generating new data that gets fed right back into the platform. These intermediaries sit completely invisibly between the public and the platforms. They don't wear a badge, but they absolutely decide what the systems can and cannot do.
Which brings us to a fascinating and honestly pretty staggering shift in how we view the state, the dependent institutional vassals.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that we usually think of governments and public institutions as the ultimate authorities, right? The kings. But in this system, the contrast is huge. An independent government builds in-house expertise, they maintain operational oversight. But a dependent one, they become hopelessly locked into private vendors. Over time, their in-house technical capacity just declines, and they experience true policy capture, where the proprietary algorithms of the platform literally shape their public policy and decisions. Their sovereignty essentially becomes conditional. They are completely reliant on a private platform that could change the rules, restrict access, or just go offline at any given moment.
Let's zoom all the way down to the bottom of the pyramid now. The powerless data serfs. This is the reality on the ground.
I want to pause right here and ask you directly, where do you fit into all of this? Think about your smartphone in your pocket, your online purchases, your daily movements. In this grand architecture of lords, intermediaries, and vassals, where exactly does the everyday citizen sit?
Well, the source material provides a pretty stark answer. When you are the product, you lose power. In this techno-feudal order, you aren't a customer, you aren't even really a user, you are the raw resource. You are a data serf, providing value, but you hold absolutely no power over the infrastructure that actually manages your life.
And the reality of this data subjugation is intense. It means your movements, your communications, and behaviors are under constant surveillance, building these permanent digital profiles that follow you everywhere. You're then scored and ranked by opaque algorithms that dictate your opportunities or assign you threat levels. And the real catch? There is no real choice here. You can't just opt out without losing essential services, travel capabilities, or even employment. Ultimately, it leads to a massive, systemic dehumanization, stripping away all context and reducing human beings to literal data points in a machine.
So, how does this all connect in the real world? Let's check out the ecosystem in practice.
This flowchart brilliantly illustrates the whole shebang at work. Look over on the far left. The digital lords own that foundational layer. In the center, you've got the middlemen, connecting them to the institutional vassals, which are your federal, state, and local agencies. But the real engine driving the whole thing is down at the bottom, the data serfs. The data flows upward from the population, gets extracted, enriched, and pushed right into the decision pipeline, which then enforces real-world actions back down onto us. It's a perfect enclosed loop. Power flows top-down, and data flows bottom-up.
To make this super concrete, let's look at some real-world examples from the research. Look at how Palantir is used by agencies like ICE. It literally turns people into data objects managed by black box algorithms, or the fact that highly sensitive public government data from the DHS and DOJ now largely lives on private Amazon Web Service servers, totally subject to corporate terms, or LexisNexis acting as a data broker for law enforcement, aggregating consumer and public records to create total dossiers on individuals without a shred of knowledge or consent. This isn't dystopian sci-fi, guys. This is our current operational architecture. Which brings us to our final section, consequences for our future. What is ultimately at stake here?
Look, when the digital infrastructure that society relies on becomes purely private property, the fallout is massive. We see a total loss of democratic accountability because you simply cannot audit a proprietary black box. That effectively hands tech giants unprecedented monopoly power. For us as individuals, it means deeply decreased autonomy and self-determination, while the state itself grows way too weak to ever build public alternatives. At its core, this architecture of mass surveillance poses severe, tangible threats to fundamental human rights and dignity.
But the research leaves us with a really crucial reminder, and it's something vital to take away from this explainer. The choice is not inevitable. The future is still ours to shape. This technofeudal system was built by human decisions, which means it absolutely can be unbuilt, or at least changed, by public interest technology, strict democratic oversight, and fiercely demanding transparency.
So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. If state sovereignty becomes entirely conditional on private vendors, and if unelected infrastructure essentially dictates our daily freedoms, can democracy as we know it actually survive in a privately owned digital world?
Thank you so much for joining me for this breakdown. To dive deeper into this research and explore these systems yourself, visit eyesonice.net. Seek the signal, map the crimes, accountability, solidarity, empathy. Keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.